Part 2. Irish NFQ and the referencing process. The Irish National Framework of Qualifications, or NFQ, has been in place since 2003. It's based in legislation which was passed in 1999. Discussions in Ireland, which had been taking place for many years previously, had identified the need for a national qualifications framework to encompass all awards for all aspects of education and training. That is, for a single, transparent frame of reference. The Irish NFQ has been defined as the single nationally and internationally accepted entity through which all learning achievements may be measured and related to each other in a coherent way, and which defines the relationship between all education and training awards.
The NFQ has 10 levels, ranging from level 1 for very basic or initial learning, right up to level 10 for quite advanced learning. The introduction of the NFQ introduced new terminology. We talk about awards or qualifications. Learning outcomes recognise knowledge, skills and competence of the individual, so what they know, understand and can apply at the end of the process, and not therefore the programme an individual has studied, the institution they attended, or indeed how long they've studied. Also in the NFQ we have classifications or categories of awards. There are major awards. These are the major blocks of learning, the awards that many people would recognise. We also have minor awards. Minor awards are intended for partial completion of a major award. So for example, an individual might choose to undertake a relatively small piece of learning, but that can be recognised by the qualification framework. They can build those up towards a major award if they choose to do so. We also have supplemental awards. These are intended in addition to a major award. There are a number of examples of occupations where it's necessary to keep your knowledge up to date on an ongoing basis. These may be quite small packages of learning, but they need to be recognised by the national framework. And of course we have special purpose awards, which are intended to recognise a very particular, relatively small piece of learning. But the design of the national framework is intended to allow the recognition of all learning.
The development of the NFQ was strongly based on consultation with national stakeholders.
We regard consultation as a major reason why the implementation of the national framework has been successful to date in Ireland. Consultation is very important, and a whole range of consultation methods were used during the development and indeed the implementation of the framework so far. One of these important consultation mechanisms is known as the consultative group. The consultative group includes representatives from government ministries, formal awarding bodies, national agencies, representatives of general, further and higher education and training, the trade unions, employers groups, and indeed the student population. The consultative group has been used as part of the process to reference to the EQF, and other examples of consultation will be mentioned later on.
The National Qualifications Authority is the designated National Coordination Point, or NCP, for implementation of the EQF in Ireland. The NCP is responsible for coordinating referencing of the Irish framework levels to the EQF using a transparent methodology, providing access to information and guidance to stakeholders on the referencing process, promoting participation of stakeholders in the referencing process. The Qualifications Authority established a national steering committee to assist it in overseeing the referencing process. The main task of the steering committee was to assist the Qualifications Authority in preparing the single comprehensive national report referencing the levels of the NFQ to the EQF. The steering committee included representatives of the national qualifications agencies, NQAI, FETAC, HETAC, the Irish Universities Association, IUA, and the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, NCCA. An independent consultant was commissioned to undertake a detailed technical comparison of the level descriptors. In addition, 3 international experts were invited to join the committee. Lewis Purser represented the university sector. Lewis is Director of Academic Affairs at the Irish Universities Association and works with university registrars and vice presidents on topics such as qualifications and awards, quality assurance, admissions policies, student affairs, access and widening participation.
My job during the referencing process was to represent the universities on the National Steering Committee, and that meant going back to the universities and getting feedback about the EQF and the National Framework qualifications and feeding that into the steering committee and the process itself. From the university's perspective, it's very important that our national qualifications are recognised at a European level. This means that our students and graduates with the Irish qualifications can go to study or to work abroad and have their qualifications and their awards fully recognised. It also means that students and graduates coming from other European countries to Ireland can bring their qualifications with them and have them recognised here in Ireland through the EQF. Since the introduction of the national framework in 2003, it means that we've much greater transparency and knowledge about the Irish qualification system. And this is really important for the universities in that it can allow much greater progression into higher education and through higher education for students and learners. The two processes, the EQF and the Bologna process, are fully compatible. The EQF we've talked about today. The Bologna process also has its own higher education framework, which we know as the Bologna framework, and the two have very, very similar, if not identical, criteria and referencing standards. The difference is that Bologna only concerns higher education, which in Ireland is our level 6 to 10 on the national framework of qualifications, whereas the EQF covers the entire range of education and training.
John Hammond is Deputy Chief Executive of the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment. The NCCA advises the Minister for Education on all matters to do with curriculum, assessment and qualifications related to the school sector. It was the agency which represented the school sector in the referencing process.
From our perspective, we were very keen to do this. It was a very important thing to do, mainly from the point of view that all learning needs to be recognised, all qualifications need to be recognised, and all the better if they're recognised through one framework, such as a national framework. So from the outset, we were very keen that the school awards would be included on the national framework of qualifications, and we worked directly with the NQAI in that context. We found it a very straightforward process. It was quick, it was smooth, it was accommodating. I've heard in the past people talking about frameworks, often referring to them being treated as frameworks of reference rather than frameworks of reference. That wasn't the case in the case of the European framework. It was very much a situation where we took the reality as it was with qualifications in Ireland. That was very sensitively dealt with and accommodated in the context of establishing a reference to the European framework. I suppose that when you compare your own qualifications with other qualifications nationally with an international framework, it's automatically going to throw up questions that you probably wouldn't pose yourself, because a lot of what you have done nationally is based on culture and on tradition and on received kind of practice. So it certainly made us reflect on the school qualifications, on where we had placed the school qualifications on the national framework. It raised questions about something that we had done in that context, which was to split the Leaving Certificate programs between levels 4 and 5 of the national framework, and the work on the European framework raised a lot of questions about that and decided us on revisiting that whole question, which we're in the process of doing. Also encouraged a lot of reflection overall on quality, on the quality of your qualifications, on the quality of your specifications, on how you monitor quality within the school system and so on. So it was very positive in terms of the opportunity that it afforded you to really reflect on the whole business of qualifications and the school qualifications in particular. Even in the early years of the national framework, there was very little known about it in schools, and schools very often struggled to see the relevance of it to the school sector. I mean, from their perspective, schools had always existed. School qualifications had always existed. Why did we need a national framework for it now? As time has progressed, and in the broader context of lifelong learning, schools are beginning to see the relevance of having a framework that describes effectively all of the qualifications in a country, and that now with the European one enables you to compare all of those qualifications within the country with European counterparts. It's also been very positive, I think, in terms of its influence on development within the school sector. You can't really imagine a new program or a new curriculum being introduced in the school sector now without reference to the national framework of qualifications or without reference to the European framework. These are now viewed as important things to check in with when you're developing new qualifications and new programs. So that's a very important development too. I would say the interface is certainly changing and improving all of the time. I think as I was saying earlier, schools have tended to exist in something of their own world, in a kind of a cocoon. I've often heard it said that schools tend to have a very underdeveloped relationship with the idea of lifelong learning and with other sectors of education, that they tend to be quite self-sufficient in that sense. I think that's changing as a result of the existence of the frameworks. I think there's more awareness being built up within schools about the framework from the early days when there was very little awareness of its purpose or its meaning for schools. So overall, I think the interface is one where, on the one hand, there's awareness raising in relation to it. Secondly, where it provides good lever for change and development within the school sector as well.